I'm going to need 4 volunteers to eat some lemons with me to start off class, if anybody would like to come on up. Nobody's jumping out. Lemons. All right, so we got our 4. All right. So what we're talking about today is that our most basic assumptions are embedded in the basic elements of our everyday lives. And we're going to start off with our taste buds. I have some very special fruit that I brought along with the lemons. And I'll just show you a quick clip of us harvesting it yesterday. Henry and George, you guys ready for miracle berries?
Can I pick them?
Yep.
I want to pick one too. We'll get the dry. This one.
This one's pretty good.
That's enough.
All right, let's go in and eat them.
Yay! Yummy, my tummy!
All right. So miracle berries are sometimes called nami berries in West Africa. They come from West Africa. And we've grown some in our garden this year. And I thought I'd share with you the experience of the nami berry. All right, so first I'm going to have you guys go ahead and I'll eat with you. We'll eat a little bit of lemon here. So just grab a lemon slice and just take a quick suck of it just to remind yourself of how lemon tastes. And be expressive if you can. Let let everybody know. How's it taste? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. But it's truly very, very sour, right? These are not like fake lemons or anything. So, all right, next we're going to chew on a nami berry. And what you're going to do with this is it's mostly seed. It's just got a pulp around the outside. So you're going to bite down very gently. If you bite the seed, it's going to be very bitter. So don't bite into the seed. And just kind of chew on the stuff around the seed very gently. Wash it around your entire mouth for about 30 seconds. And thank you. All right. So go ahead and just barely bite down. It should be like a slightly sweet cranberry. Wash that around for about 30 seconds. So what's happening right now is there's a protein called miraculin. It's called miraculin because it's kind of miraculous, and it's binding to your tongue, and it will make anything acidic taste very, very sweet. Okay. So after you've done it for a while, you probably already taste the sweet taste because the lemon's already in your mouth. Okay, and you can just put out the seed in there. Okay, now bite the lemon and let the folks know what it tastes like. It's like really good, right? It's like lemon sherbet. So this is like dessert at our house. Yeah, so in West Africa, for the last 300 years at least, they've been using the miracle berry to make foods that would otherwise be unpalatable, palatable, and eat them. Delicious, right? So feel free to take some more lemons. It'll last for about 30 minutes. So you have 30 minutes to enjoy your lemon. All right, thanks a lot. So good. All right, and this introduces the big ideas of lesson 4. Number 1 is that the world is not actually how we see it, or in a way it is. It's a reflection of how we perceive it. So the lemon, of course, is not in itself sour. It's our experience of the lemon that is sour. And that's very important because your experiences can change. And how we see is mostly affected by how we think. And here's the big kicker of this and where we get kicked into exploration of language. How we think is affected by how we talk. We do not think much about how we talk. And so our words control us rather than us controlling our words. And more of us get kind of lazy about how we talk. We don't really think about how we're talking. We don't do what's called sort of metacognition, which is thinking about how we're thinking and thinking about how we're talking. And here's the big kicker, is when we explore and expand our words, we explore and expand our world. And that's why we're doing Challenge 4, which is where you're actually going to invent new words that have never been invented before. that actually change the way you think, and maybe can change the way your friends think, and you're going to try to spread these words around your dorm or your house or wherever you live. You're going to try to spread these words around to make the world a better place. So your goal is to invent new words that make the world a better place. So let me give you a sense of how important communication is. So there's a story in your textbook by Susan Schaller about a man without words. This is a young man, 27, who has really no language at all. He doesn't even know language exists. He's deaf, and he's sitting in a classroom, just kind of sat there by his parents, and his parents don't know what to do with him. Susan Schaller is sort of a para teacher who specializes in communicating with the deaf. And she's working with him, trying to basically share with him the beauty of language, but he doesn't even know language exists. And she knows this because when she goes up to him and says, "Hi, my name is Susan," so she'll sign, "Hi, my name is Susan," he will sign back, "Hi, my name is Susan." He doesn't get that this is an exchange. He just thinks like he's supposed to imitate people. And so eventually she comes up with this idea that she could sit at a table with him, and she would sit here and he's sitting over there, and she would sign to an imaginary person over here, and then she would jump over here and sign back, and then she would jump over here and sign again. And she was hoping that he would get that this is supposed to be an exchange, like a conversation. And one day, after weeks and weeks of this, he finally just slams his hands down on the table, and he looks around, and he's getting it. And he starts pointing at things. He points at the door, and she signs door. He points at the desk, and she signs desk. He points at himself, and she says Ildefonso. And at that point, he just starts crying. Because for the first time, he'd been awoken to humanity. And this is what Susan Schaller says about it. She says, "He had entered the universe of humanity, discovered the communion of minds. He now knew that he and a cat and the table all had names, and he could see the prison where he'd existed alone, shut out of the human race for 27 years. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book if you're interested in it. And then there's this other side of things, right? That's the power of language to bring us into communion with each other. The fact that I'm speaking to you now is so amazing, and that we can connect with each other in this way. But then there's this other piece of language, which is that maybe it shuts us off in another way. Some people imagine, for example, dogs and cats who don't have language being in constant communion with the world. And maybe that's true. There's a neuroscientist named Jill Bolte Taylor who had a stroke. And as she was going into the stroke, she could feel it happening. She knew it was happening because she's a neuroscientist. And basically her language faculty was shutting down. And she kind of maintained awareness as long as she could. And she had this amazing experience of what it's like to have no language. This is how she describes it.
In that bed without words, she says she felt connected to things, to everything, in a way that she never had before.
Oh, yeah. I lost all definition of myself in relationship to everything in the external world.
You mean you couldn't figure out where you ended?
Mm-hmm.
How much of that was about language? A little part? A lot?
Oh, I would say it was huge. Language is an ongoing information processing. It's the constant reminder. I am. This is my name. This is all the data related to me. These are my likes and my dislikes. These are my beliefs. I am an individual. I am a single. I'm a solid. I'm separate from you.
And she says, at one point, she says, imagine coming out in the morning, and instead of feeling the sun shining and saying, "Oh, that's the sun shining," you just felt the sun shining. It would be this sort of sense of oneness. And this is actually something that's pursued in many religions like Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, in which people actually try to quiet the mind so that they can experience directly the world. So language has this double-sidedness of putting us in communion with others, but in other ways it's making a prison for us and making us think in a certain way and making us see the world in a certain way, seeing separations where maybe separations don't exist, and so on. So let me start off I'm going to give you a tour of languages and show you how different they can be and how they can open up different parts of our mind. The first one, I'm going to share a language with you, and I'm going to see if anybody can identify what language this is. So I'll play a clip for you, and I know lots of you speak different languages. Maybe one of you actually understands this.
Vader Ura, dul de art on helvenum, zie din nama je halwod, do bekoma din riche, je woorde din willa, on eortan swa on helvenum,
Any guesses on what that is? Yeah. Right. So it is actually English, and it's Old English, and here, and this is amazing, right? Because if you went back in time about, say, 1,000 years, this is what you would hear, and there's nobody speaking what you speak. Like, this is it. This would be about as close as you could get to your language. It's quite remarkable, right? That's actually the Lord's Prayer as it was spoken in the 11th century, Father Ur, and so on.
Father Ur, dul de art on Helvenum, see the namag je halwood.
And you can see how that changes over time by 1400. There it's Our Father, that art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. 1611, the King James, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And then the 1963, Our Heavenly Father, may your name be honored. And it starts to sound more and more familiar over the years. And now, language changes all the time, and you've even experienced it in your own lifetime with new words popping up now and then. But we can also trace back about 6,000 to 8,000 years. We can see that English actually is in the same family as things like Hindi over here, Farsi, Scottish, as well as all the Latin languages, Norwegian, German, Dutch. And all of these are related, and you can see that English is actually a combination of Latin languages and Germanic languages, and that's because of the French, the Norman invasion of England in 1066 that brought the Latin into English. So this is what a language map of the world looks like. It's even broader than Proto-Indo-European. What you just saw is just this little sort of light green area here. And when you look all over the world, there's actually 40 different language families, and there's over 6,000 languages. And what I want to present to you today is that each one of them actually offers a different view of the world. It, in a way, shapes your taste in a different way. It shapes your perceptions in a different way. So let me take you into New Guinea and give you a sense of what it's like to speak a New Guinea language. So these are a couple of my friends in New Guinea. This is us on the porch. We've now built the house, and we've built the chicken fence over here that you can see. I told you that little story. And we've painted the house so that it will last a long time. And we even have a little solar panel up on top that gives us about 2 hours of battery life in my laptop every day. But no internet connection or anything like that, but that's what we have. And I would sit on the porch here every morning, and I would just talk with these guys. These are like my best friends. This is Lazarus and my father, Malok. And they would try to teach me the language, and it was really hard. You know, you just kind of have to listen and point to things and see if they would say what you're saying. Sometimes you point to something and they would say you're pointing instead of saying the name of the thing, so that would get confusing. But you know, I was sitting there every morning, and I noticed that this guy would walk by, and every morning he'd say Nelly Yombi Katobani. And so I decided to ask them what was going on there and what that word means. And so I wrote it down, and I'll just show you what this looks like here. Maybe. You guys don't see that, do you? You see it now? Nope. There it is. All right, so this is the phrase, and it just runs past very fast, and so you're just trying to catch it. Nelly Yombi Tobani. And I'm very excited. I say, oh, what does that mean? And he says, oh, he's going to the garden. And then I said, well, how would you say she is going to the garden? And they say, Uli Yombi Katobanu. And so I'm starting to notice a pattern. I'm getting very excited, and you know, and so I'm every day I'd go into my room and I would write these things down, and I would play like this kind of music that would bring out like this sense of discovery, right? And so I'm having this epiphany, and then I say, how do you say he is going to the garden? And they'd say Eli Yombi Katobana. So now I'm really getting somewhere. And then I say, okay, now I just want to know how you'd say you are going to the garden. I say, how do you say you are going to the garden? And he says, Nelly Yombi Katobani. He says the same thing as up here. And I say, no, you are going to the garden. How do you say you are going to the garden? And he says, Nelly Yombi Katobani. And then I say, no, you are going to the garden. He says, no, I'm staying right here. You're still very confused. So this went on for quite some time, but I'm not alone in this. There's other people who have struggled with this kind of thing. So here's Daniel Everett. He worked in the Amazon among the Paraha, which is one of the most difficult languages ever discovered. And just give a sense of like how he worked with this language. I'll I'll fly you in here real quick. This is actually part of a piece that you guys have to watch for your class today or later this week. So some of you may have already seen this, but here's a short clip from it.
Piraha can be spoken, hummed, sung, even whistled.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's such a great way to hunt, of course, to be able to do this. But the reason why they can do that is because the language is tonal. So if you take a single word like awe, like it can mean like 10 different things, so just depending on how you emphasize it.
The word for ear is awe, and the word for skin is awe, and the word for foreigner is awe, and the word for hand is awe, and the word for Brazil nut shell is awe, and that's only distinguished by the tones, all of those.
So how do you learn a language like this? It's not necessarily just by pointing, some of it's pointing, but as you try to uncover sentence structure, it gets a little bit more complicated. And here's an example of how Dan was learning the language down there.
And spending day after day doing this, you can see how you can construct a knowledge of the language without any language in common, and eventually I learned Piraha.
So this is what's called frame substitution, and this is like a basic technique for learning a new language if the language has never been written down. And this is what I ended up doing. That's what I was doing when I was saying, he goes to the garden, and then they gave me the Ellie, and then I say she's going to the garden, say Uli. So I'm starting to understand like Ellie and Uli are he and she. But then you can do even more. When I would ask them, what's the word for garden? They would just repeat the whole phrase again. And the reason why they do that is because they've never written their language, and they have no concept of the idea of words, like separate words. So you can't just say like, tell me just the part of the word that's the word for garden. That was very difficult. So instead I would say something like, how would you say he's going to the house? And then they'd say, Eli am katobana. And am would replace yongbip. And so then you knew, so Nelly yongbip katobani is I'm going to the garden. Nelly am katobani is I'm going to the house. And Nelly yongbip katobani is garden. So now you know that am is house, yongbip is garden. And this is how you start to decode a language if you are out in the field without a written language of any sort. So one of the advantages I had was that I would speak Pidgin English with them, which is this language that's kind of a combination of English, German, and it's basically all these colonial languages mixed with a local grammar. So it's actually about 80% English, which makes it really easy to pick up. So that helped me a lot with the language. And I can just quickly tell a story if you'd like. Just tell me a story that I could tell, and I will tell it in Pidgin. I'll see if you guys can pick it up. So just any story about anything. 3 little pigs. Okay. I have to remember the story now. That's with a wolf and all that. Okay. So, all right. So, triple pig, you walk in triple house. Now, one pala house, me no good to mas. Me walk in one time, grass no good, me no got strong. Number 2 pig, me walk in another pala house. Me got strong pala DY, so strong politically. Number 3 pig, walk in another pala house and made of stone. So strong pala truya. This pala, one dog no good. Me come like win him this pala pig, kai pig. So me go along house number 1. I'm walking win, he go on top. House him poon down. Now and pig him run away, go on number 2 house. Now this pala pig, this pala dog no good. And me go down house number 2. Now I'm win him on top. House poon down. Now 2 pala pig it run house number 3. Now 3 pala stopped house number 3. Now this pala dog no good come and I'm trying to win him. He goes. now how some stand up strong. And when him again, how stand up strong again. And I forget how it ends. So that was the story, but you guys get and you can almost pick it out, right? So the beauty of this is that within a month, I was speaking fairly well Pidgin, and I could understand them. And I was really like pretty deep into this other world. What happened soon after that was I started to realize how different this world was, largely through the local language. And that's where language and thought comes in. So there's this, what's called the principle of linguistic relativity, sometimes called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This is a very popular hypothesis, so it shows up far outside of anthropology as well. And it's also very controversial. What I want to point out is that the state-of-the-art science on this is that a lot of what's called the strong idea that language shapes thought is not true. It's an overstatement to say something like language determines thought. For example, it is true that many Eskimo groups have hundreds of words for snow that you and I do not have. However, if you talk to somebody who skis a lot, they have a lot more words for snow than you or I do as well. And so experience can actually shape this, and you always have resources in your language to grab new thoughts. But it is true that language shapes thought and action. And especially when a language forces you to do something that other languages don't. And that's what is really interesting about my friends in New Guinea, is that it turns out that as I was sitting there on the veranda and this guy says Nelly Yongbik Tobani every day, well, pretty soon somebody comes by and he says Nelly Yongbik Kametbani. Instead of Katobani, he says Kametbani. And it turns out that every time you speak in New Guinea, you have to say whether you're going uphill or downhill or across the river or across the river this way, up the mountain or down the mountain. And so your position is always well known. I'll tell you more about why that matters in a second. But first, a quick demonstration. So we're going to, this is an actual experiment that anthropologists have been doing for several years. So I need a volunteer, and then I'll need, yeah, come on up. And then we're going to need somebody in the back to pretend like they're a table. Here, you stand over here, and you look this way. And you can see we have Willie, a bear, and I don't know what that is. It's like it's a thing that my kids use for Halloween trick-or-treating. So a trick-or-treat bag, but it's got a skull on it. It's facing this way. So they're all facing the same direction. And now you're going to take these same things. So you have a Willie, a bear, and a trick-or-treat bag. And you're going to, without turning around, you have to memorize how they are here. You're going to turn around and go to the back of the room. And can somebody stand at the back of the room and just be a table? Or Ben, do you want to go back and just be a table? So just put your hands out like that. And, okay, so do you think you're ready? All right, so memorize it. And you're going to turn around and you're going to go back and set the same thing up back there. All right, ready? Genius music. Help her think through this. All right, she's done it. How many people think she's correct? You can stand up and look here if you need to. All right, so how many people think she's correct? Just raise your hand. Think she's incorrect? Raise your hand. So we actually have like some disagreement here, and it's because there is some ambiguity. You can turn around now, and you can see that you are actually correct if you are going from left to right, but you're incorrect if you're going from, say, northeast, I don't know, northwest to southeast or something like that, right? Or if you're like my friends in New Guinea who would orient it toward this line, toward this uphill slope here. All right, so thank you for that. So here's the thing, is that when we do these studies, we find that Dutch speakers, for example, who almost always use words like links and recht, which are right and left, they almost always do it the way that you did it. When Mayan speakers do it, they always do it the other way. When my friends in New Guinea do it, they always do it the other way. They always orient it in an absolute fashion to north and south, east and west, rather than oriented to their body. And so this actually is a demonstration of how language definitely shapes thought and action. This is where it gets really interesting, though, is that my friends in New Guinea and many other people who speak like this, who basically, here's how it works with my friends in New Guinea. Every time you say, how are you doing, you say where you're going. So instead of saying like, hey, how you doing, their greeting is, hey, where are you going? Like kind of like, what's up? But to answer that, you have to not only say like which direction you're going, you also have to know which direction they are coming from. And you have to constantly be oriented and know exactly which way is which. And that means that these people who speak like this have what's called dead reckoning. Like they always know exactly which way they're facing. They would say something like, hey, Seth, your north shoe is untied. Like instead of saying your left shoe is untied, they would say your north shoe is untied. And how many people in this room would even know which way is north right now, right? Like that's actually, you would. but it's very difficult to know for most people. And this is a power that's so powerful that this is why some people like Captain Cook would grab native explorers to go with them to orient them out at sea, like Tapaya, the famous Polynesian explorer, who also could read the waves and read the stars to know exactly where they were. And this power is actually something that is nurtured in a third of all languages. Here's Laura Baradowski talking about it.
And these are not folks that have magnets or special ant superpowers. They're using the same cognitive system that we're using. They're just using it differently. They're paying attention to something that we normally don't pay attention to.
So this is what's really interesting, is that every one of us in the room was born with the power of dead reckoning. And by dead reckoning, I mean that you could know your position within a few degrees north, south, at every moment of your life. And they would take like a Mayan speaker. Stephen Levinson once took a Mayan speaker and he spun him around in a dark room 20 times on a chair, like an office chair, spun him around 20 times, and he still knew exactly which way he was facing at the end of it. This is a power all of us have, and it's atrophied because we don't use it every day. But if your language forces you to use it, then you keep that capacity and you can have dead reckoning. So here's another piece of how language shapes our thought, is the way we use metaphors. And the metaphors are often sort of hidden. So these are some quotes from a typical argument. And you can see by the quotes themselves that we have an implicit metaphor that's hidden, that we don't really think about, that argument is a war. So here it says, like, your claims are indefensible, you disagree, okay, shoot, I already shot down all your points. You're always attacking my points, that's why I always win. So you can see we think about arguments as something that is a battle that you win or lose. And we could think about disagreements in very different ways. Instead, you could think of them as a dance in which you're trying to get in step with each other, and that would be a very different metaphor to operate under. And I'll just mention that that's actually, again, in the effort to take control of your thinking, I'll just ask you next time you're in an argument to try to push out the idea that this is about winning and losing, and try to welcome in a different metaphor. Like welcome in the metaphor of dancing with this person and trying to understand them and get in step with them. That might be a much more better metaphor. And you can then explore metaphors in other aspects of your life, like love. Think about how we talk about love. We often talk about love as something you fall into. We talk about falling into love. But is that the best metaphor? Lakoff and Johnson, the two philosophers who first started studying metaphor, actually cataloged many different ways of us talking about love. Sometimes we talk about it as sort of a force, like you can feel the electricity between us, there are sparks, that kind of thing. You feel magnetically drawn to somebody. Sometimes we talk about it as madness, like you say, I'm crazy about her, she drives me out of my mind. Sometimes we think of it as magic, like love is, she cast a spell over me, the magic is gone. These are all ways of talking about it as magic. But they also point out that there are other metaphors available to us if you are intentional about it. For example, you could think of metaphor as a collaborative work of art. And then suddenly it's a very different way of thinking about love rather than something that just happens to you, that you fall into. It could be something that you work on and create together. And that might be a better metaphor for living your life. So similarly then, if we move to another big thing that we think a lot about is like finding ourselves. And that's again a metaphor, right? Like what does it mean to find yourself? And does that metaphor actually drive us to do things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise do, or think in ways that we wouldn't otherwise think? And could we have other metaphors? So maybe we could think about, instead of finding yourself, you could talk about creating yourself, or as you know, my favorite poet, Marshall Mathers, says. So notice that every single one of these yellow phrases here is actually a metaphor. Like, you know, every single one is in some way framing a metaphor. And he's a poet, so he's very good at it. And it touches us very deeply. And we can all like have this sense of like, yeah, like losing yourself. Sometimes that actually feels like the way to find yourself is to lose yourself. And that's a very powerful way to think about things. What I'm asking from you guys is to start thinking of yourself as a poet. Not that you're going to write things for the world like Marshall Mathers, but take control of your words, because that'll allow you to start taking control of your life as well. So here's another really interesting piece of research is Deborah Tannen's was a bestseller back in the 90s called You Just Don't Understand. It was about how women and men talk. And what she discovered was she started hanging out with families and then children of all ages and studying how they talk to each other. And she discovered what are called genderlects. So you've heard of dialects before. The genderlect is this idea that people of different genders are basically taught to teach and taught to speak in different ways. And that dramatically affects relationships between genders later on. So here, I'm going to play a short clip of her from the 90s. This is from the early part of her research. And she's going to talk to you about different ways that boys and girls talk to each other.
We invited friends, already best friends, to take chairs outside the room. We said, take the chair in the room and just talk to each other. So that's what you're going to see now. Here's 5-year-old girls, and you can see that each one is leaning into the other as they talk. They're 5-year-old boys. You can see how uncomfortable they are being asked to just sit and talk to each other. That wouldn't be their choice. Never look at each other. If you watch their faces, you'll see they never look at each other. These are the 10-year-old girls. They put the chairs slightly at angles, but they faced each other. So if you keep your eyes on their faces, you can see that they continue looking one directly at the other. 10-year-old boys. They put the chairs side by side, and you can see again how uncomfortable they are just having to sit and talk and never look at each other directly. Here are the 15-year-old girls. Their chairs are farther away, but they're looking directly one at the other. One is telling the other about a gift that she bought for a friend. A lot of the talk between the girls is about their friends. But if you look at their faces, the gaze. Okay. 15-year-old boys. He keeps his face glued on his foot rather than on his friend. And they were discussing the meaning of life.
So these really dramatic differences start young, and then they go on. And I actually see it with my own boys. I'm just shocked to see like how gendered they are and how like their conversations are all very much like the way she describes them here. And so one of the things that she's found is that that men and women can be separated on a number of ways, and these things actually then affect the way that they interact with each other. So, for example, men are taught from a very young age to pursue status. And this affects all aspects of our lives. And in fact, this becomes one of the big things that men have to wrestle with throughout their lives is whether they're going to continue to pursue status or find peace in their life by not pursuing status. Women, on the other hand, are encouraged to pursue connection. And you can actually see this with young kids. Like here, I'll play the clip here on the left. There's a bunch of young boys talking, and it's a very typical discussion that young boys would have.
Mine's all the way up to there. Mine's up to the sky.
They're talking about how high they can throw a ball.
Oh, man. Mine's all the way up to heaven. Mine's... Oh! Mine's up all the way up to God.
And they're all like, whatever. And this is like the constant drama of being a boy, right? You're always like in competition, so much so that friendships sometimes feel more like like friends are sort of like people you can impress rather than actual friends. And that's one of the challenges for guys, is to create real friendships when we've been enculturated from a very young age to only seek status. So that's a very difficult thing. So now let's turn to women, and we're going to look at the same age of young girls talking, and notice the way they talk and how different it is from the boys you just saw.
Did you know my babysitter called Amber had already contacts? My mom has already contacts, and my dad does too. The same?
So she's weird, but what's really interesting is like the sort of normal girl actually copies the bad grammar of the other girl, right? By like saying my dad already contacts too, right? And it's like not grammatically correct, but she actually mirrored the bad grammar of the first girl. If it was a guy thing, like the guy would be like, you don't know how to talk. Like, just don't talk. and instead, like, there's this connection being built, and that's very different. And this then will actually end up shaping later conversations when men and women start to get together. The women are going to make basic assumptions about how a conversation should go based on the idea that it should be built on connection, whereas men are going to be thinking about status. So that then leads to another difference, is that men tend to be more direct, women tend to be more indirect. This can shift in different contexts, but this is just a loose categorization here. So the standard story you might hear is, like a guy and woman are going past an ice cream shop, and she says something like, hey, do you want to get some ice cream? And he says no and keeps on driving, right? And that's like he missed the indirect cue of like, I would like to get some ice cream. But that goes back to connection. The reason why women are more indirect is because they're interested in building connection. So they don't say, I want to get some ice cream. They say, do you want to get some ice cream? Because they want to sort of see, like, who all wants to get ice cream? And then if we can build a sense of consensus, then let's go get ice cream together. But a lot of men miss that. And this is sometimes called meta-communication, is that women are much more cued into the things that are being said that are unsaid when something...
I just asked if it was diet!
That's where I come in. Excuse me. By asking if it was diet, she took it as you trying to imply that you thought she was fat. Go get a red rose, get a regular Coke, tell her she's everything you never knew you always wanted. Any problems, give me a call.
So that's the meta message, right? You're always sending this sort of other message that's unspoken, and women tend to be much more cued into that. So then the final distinction she talks about is the big one that kind of summarizes the two, and that's that men tend to hear reports, women try to build rapport. And this has to do with men sort of being, sort of fixing things to make sure they're elevated in their status and all that kind of thing, where women are trying to build connection and build rapport. So a common problem in relationships is that a woman comes home and starts talking about her day, and it's like a bunch of issues she had, a bunch of problems, and he immediately goes into problem-solving mode and tries to solve the problem. What she hears is that you don't think my problems are real problems because you think they have easy solutions. And and he's just trying to help out, just trying to hear the reports and solve the problem. So it's important to see that there are these different assumptions underlying this, because it allows you to, if you're a guy, to recognize that this is about building rapport. And sometimes what you're supposed to do is just open your heart and mind and just listen and just be there for them, and that's all it takes. So this is a very, I think, useful thing to recognize, that we have these different ways of talking. A lot of this is, of course, captured in all kinds of movies and TV shows. Does anybody watch Friends? Friends has this stuff all over the place.
Ross kissed me.
No! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
It's unbelievable.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Okay, all right. We want to hear everything. Monica, get the wine and unplug the phone. Okay.
And then I kissed her.
Tongue?
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's the report, right? And then the women are like rapport. Let's talk about this and build rapport. Let's connect over this. And so it's a very different kind of experience. So here's what's really interesting about this. And I imagine some of you are uneasy with this because you're like, that doesn't seem like me at all. Like, this seems opposite. And that's actually often the case, that these things can flip. So it's not entirely about men and women. And in fact, there's even been some studies recently of gay couples. And what they find is that these two types still emerge. Sometimes they're flipped. If it's a gay couple, some will sort of take the connection role and some will take the status role. But essentially what happens is you get this pushing apart. And what's going on is that one side is trying to build connection. The other side is trying to build, as maybe feels a threat to their independence. And as those two interact, the person who's trying to build connection sort of reaches out to build connection. The other one pushes away, and it creates what's called schismogenesis. The two sides kind of create each other. It's a really big, fancy word that's actually super useful once you figure it out. You'll see schismogenesis everywhere in your life once you really master the idea. And it's this idea that sometimes two people are actually creating the dynamics in one another. So we often think that the problem rests in the other person. But it turns out that what you're doing is actually creating the dynamic that's creating the person doing the thing that they're doing. So schismogenesis is the idea that we sometimes create the other, and drive the other away from us, creating a schism. So that's the schismogenesis piece that we often see in relationships. And like I said, sometimes these things can flip, and Friends, of course, has a very sort of demonstrates this very well in one of the relationships.
And what is going on with you two? I can't believe this. She lied. She tricked me into having sex with her.
So? You got to have sex, right?
What's the matter with me? Why am I such a girl?
So we see that a lot on Friends. So here's the payoff of all this, is that the point of all this is that you have to explore and expand your words in order to explore and expand your world. And the explore piece is every bit as important as the expand piece here. Oftentimes we don't see the metaphors we're using. We don't see the style of communication that we're using, whether it's based on status or connection. And we have to really explore those things because it allows us then to live a better life and expand our world as well. So I'm going to give you one more teaser, and this will lead into your recitation this week, in which you'll talk more about the Piraha, and you're assigned to watch the full documentary. I just want to play a clip from this to show you just how different a language can be. So back to Daniel Everett among the Piraha.
The Piraha have no numbers.
Somebody asked me once, you mean Piraha mothers don't know how many children they have? Well, that's exactly what I mean. They don't know how many children they have, but they know all of their children's names and they know all of their children's faces. They don't need to know how many children they have to know who their children are and how they feel about them.
So that's number one. The Piraha have basically no numbers. They have sort of like 1, 2, and a few. They also have no tenses, apparently. So they don't have past, present, and future tense. So this becomes very strange. And what happens to Daniel Everett, I'll give away a little bit of the documentary just to entice you to watch it. It's an amazing documentary. It's called The Grammar of Happiness because their grammar has no tenses. And by having no tenses, Daniel Everett comes to think that maybe that's why they're so happy, because they're always living in the moment. And here's a clip showing what that looks like.
As Everett immersed himself in their world, he had a profound realization. The Piraha appear to live entirely in the present.
They're not worried about whether they're going to eat later because they know very well they can just go out on the river and get fish. They let each activity be dictated by their needs of the moment rather than by their worries of the future or their knowledge of the past. They live in the present.
For many, the pursuit of happiness means living free of regret and future worry. It's something the Piraha seem to have mastered.
When I'm around these people and I'm by myself with them and I talk to them, they're just so relaxed and so laid back and so hard to agitate and get excited or get worried. They just have so much to teach us about taking each day one day at a time.
All right, so you will have the chance to talk about that in your recitation. For your question of the day, I want you to think about this right here and maybe just like reflect on whether or not there's any relationship in your life where this actually helps you think through it, or if there's anything else in the lecture. We talked about different metaphors for love and finding yourself and things like that. Any sort of insight into a word or a style of talking that might actually shape the way you think in new ways and actually help you think through something in a new way. So just a reflection on the big ideas of the lecture, like genderlex, like metaphors, and some way in which it actually like shapes and might actually help you think in new ways. Garrett is not here today, is that right? And so Ben will pick up Garrett's. And you'll grab Kennedy's as well. So Aaron will grab Kennedy's. Yeah, one more time on the, so you can reflect on genderlex, for example, and just talk about how that could help you in a relationship that you're in right now, or if that's not useful, reflect on the metaphors we talked about, like thinking about love in different ways or finding yourself in different ways. Or if you want to get a jump on lesson 4, you could talk about some word or metaphor that you wish existed that you'd like to spread that would help people think through things in different ways. Yeah. Yeah.
From when they're trying to figure out what was causing the villager's illness.
Oh, uh-huh.
Had a shaman come in. When you said that a bag with a